Hi and welcome you guys to a really special moment. I'm here with Dr. Brian Clement. Hi, Brian.
How are
Lovely
you
to
doing
meet you.
there today? It's so nice to see you again.
Amazing. Great to be with you. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm so looking forward to this cutting edge interview. And I'm really looking forward to what we are diving in today.
Great.
Great. Before we get started, I'd love, there's so many ways how you can start an interview, and I'd just love to start it a little bit different today. And I'd love to ask you, I mean, you've done so many things. You've written so many books. You co-founded the Hippocrates Health Institute in Florida. You've given a gazillion interviews, and you've been featured in like so many documentaries and so many places. And it's amazing how much power is behind what you do and how much passion. And, we met also in Miami, Florida, and wow, I was so blown away how you're simply burning for what you're doing. And I want to kick off this interview with the question, why do you do what you do and what really keeps you going?
Well, I was a boy. I was fortunate because I was surrounded by people who cared. They not only loved me and supported me, but they cared. And they always talked to me about other people and causes. I was never, ever not aware that other people didn't have the benefits that I had. And I was taught to have gratitude. I was always aware that being a white male, it's privilege. And, everyone else other than white males do not have privilege. And so I also grew up at a time, I was a hippie. So I was a musician. I played in rock bands and jazz bands and smoked grass, unfortunately, when I was 12 years old, and did that until became a vegan.
Now you're high on other stuff,
I'm
sprouts,
much higher
wheatgrass.
on other stuff. That stuff didn't make me high; it made me dumb. That's
Yeah.
what it made me. But and it was a civil rights era here in the United States and around the world, in France and Germany, and it was a worldwide event where young people, for the first time ever, in forces, stood up and said, "No, we're not going to go along with the status quo." And of course, the United States was creating imperialism at that point in Vietnam, and I refused to go to Vietnam. So it sort of was part of it. And because of my own state of affairs, being stoned on grass and eating so much on a daily basis, I became severely overweight. And thank God, found a woman who was 75 years old at the point, who told me stories at first I didn't believe. She told me that she had healed cancer with vegetables. And I thought, well, this lady has to be crazy, because everyone I'd ever heard that had cancer were dying or dead already. Either they were dead or they were dying. And the reality, quite simple, is that she took me and put me under her wing and guided me. And I lost enormous amounts of weight. But really what happened, my burden and fear went away. Although I had a privileged lifestyle and I was loved, the burden of being in a situation where I felt helpless in some way went. And when the fear went, the consciousness raised, and I was fortunate that I gravitated to raw food. Now, I didn't do this in an academic way. I didn't say, oh, I'm going to eat raw food. I was living in a place where it was very warm here in the United States, in Oregon, Southern Oregon, where it was about 40 degrees every day for 2 months. And I just didn't want to cook food. So I started to eat raw food and felt unbelievable. I mean, I never felt that way in my life. I felt like a bird who could fly around the planet 10 times. And remember, I read this very obscure book called Be Your Own Doctor from, now, as you know, the founder of Hippocrates, who also healed stage 4 cancer back in the early 1950s and created the world's first holistic health center. and that was Hippocrates. And we opened our doors in 1956. So I went there to visit, and she asked me if I would work there. And one thing I wasn't lacking is ambition. So I said yes. And that's the rest of the story.
Wow, and it kept you going ever since.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at when you see the power of truth and the power of the universe on a daily basis. You know, I'm sitting here in my office with people who were told they're going to die, who are totally alive. On the campus right now, we have 3 people that should have died prospectively 7 years ago, 10 years ago, and 14 years ago. One had stage 4 liver cancer, one stage 4 ovarian cancer, and one was crippled with multiple sclerosis. They're all completely recovered, as healthy as I am. It's not hard to continue on. And I always feel it's a privilege to do what I do. You know, it's not work. People say I work hard. I don't work at all. You know, this is like plugging into the right socket, and the energy is there, and I just boom, boom, boom. We just keep going.
Yeah, beautiful. I feel the same. It's so beautiful to share that, because it's a completely different mindset and experience of being alive when we look out there where, you know, people are hustling and kind of just, wow, being programmed and just, yeah, lost in suffering in a way. And when we can actually make the step and reawaken the dormant seed within, so to say, then life begins and we connect to everything that's alive, and we get to share all of it.
You know, the French say it so well: amour, amour, amour. And that's what life should be. It should be love. You know, I was just teaching here yesterday to the guest, and I said, look, all we want is to be loved and to love. You know, we want to be loved and to love other people. And if we just remember that and keep coming back to that, all of this hostility and confusion and lost, you know, humanity goes away. And we all have that capacity, no matter what we've been through, no matter what our childhood was like. We can liberate ourselves. The mission statement of Hippocrates is liberate humans and the planet Earth. And that's our entire motivation to have done this now for over 65 years here. And myself, 51 years. This is my 51st year doing this.
Wow. And help people help themselves. And that's also
absolutely
the key, right?
I mean, you know, the other con job, even with the alternative doctors and the alternative medicine, is I'm going to heal you. That's absolute nonsense. Nobody heals anyone else unless you believe in magic, you know. And I believe in magic, but a different kind of magic. The reality is, the best we can do as physicians, as doctors, healthcare practitioners, is enthusiastically guide and educate people, and hopefully ignite their own wisdom within them. And when people are here, it's quite protective, and you're encloistered in a womb. You know, you're in mommy's womb here. But the whole objective we have is to educate people so when they go out into the sick world, to live in a sane way.
Yeah, totally. All right, all is set. The interview is over. Have a great day. No,
Could be.
It could be amour, 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 and everything was said.
Exactement.
Magnifique. Beautiful. All right, how about, I really want to go full circle. So life gets, I mean, everything is so simple on one level. And then I know, though, that also many people have many questions, and I really want to address, like, starting this conversation, also I want to address a few misconceptions, or, you know, there's so much noise out there. Yeah. And obviously the key is to listen to our inner voice, and then simply intuitively also know, okay, what is good for me, which food does me well, which environment, which people, right? Though it has to be kickstarted. And that's why, for example, your life transformation program is such a great way to do that. You also have this program now running in Germany, and we'll get to speak about that also a little bit later. And to get started, though, I'd love to maybe we kick it off with, how can one truly start to make a change?
Well, one has to recognize they need to change. I mean, it's the biggest concern I have is that people are very comfortable in average lifestyles. People are telling me often I'm healthy just because they're not diagnosed with a disease. Uh, you know, we've marginalized who we are as human beings. And I always say that about 95% of the public live at a subhuman level. And our historic education all around the world, be it in Europe or the United States, is always talking about the fault of the human race, the wars we've had, the murders and assassinations of leaders. They formally educate you in school about our corruption. And so no wonder we have a really bad attitude about our species. And no wonder we're willing to be average people and just get by and hope to God that the big shoe doesn't come and squash us. And that's my biggest concern. So how do you awaken yourself? Well, I see it here when people are diagnosed with diseases. But I also see it when people come to a realization that they really have the ability to be responsible for their life, that you don't need an expert always to tell you what to do or a coach to guide you throughout life. You said it so well and beautifully, love, that if we could just quiet our minds, our intellect, which we always cherish, we think our intellect is who we are. It's crazy. Your instinct is who you are. And the instinct is connected to God, the universe, and never makes a mistake. It's the mind that sabotages you. How many times have those of you listening said to yourself, I feel I want to do something, and the mind intervenes, oh, no, you can't do that. You tried it before, it doesn't work. And then it fails. If you just go along with the instinct, it will give you the guidance. And I think change is a scary word, and it's the only thing that's inevitable, which is weird. In the United States, we have a saying, I'm sure it's global, that all there is in life is death and taxes. Not true. All there is in life is change. Every second you're changing and changing, and we hate it. We're holding it. No, I don't want to change.
Uncertainty, and, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you a wonderful story. Well, it wasn't wonderful at the time. When I lived out west, I was always living near an ocean. So when we want to entertain ourselves, I was just swimming in the tropical sea here, the other day, and it's 45 degrees now, the water, and it's wonderful. But there was only a river where I was living, and the local people said, you just get in the river and you relax and you float. You can float for hours and hours. I said, great. I couldn't get this relaxed concept. I thought I was very relaxed, and when I would go in, I would sink. So it took me many, many weeks to finally realize it was my mind that was doing that I was tight and like a stone. But once I released my muscles and relaxed and breathed and let the air come in, I floated. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences. The only thing I can equate it to for you is if you're a good skier, when you're skiing down a mountain, or if you're a surfer, when you're on top of the wave and it's coming down, you're really connected to God and the universe at that point. So I'm connected, and I'm on the third time I'm doing this, and I stand up and I turn in the wrong direction in the river, and it pulls me under and I'm dying. I'm actually breathing water in. And I put my arm out and I grabbed a root on the bank, and I dragged myself out of the water and laid for 1 hour, spitting water up. And it took me a while to understand the message. But the message is clear. Life is the river. It's constantly moving and changing. If you take a photograph from above of a river, it never is the same. It changes course constantly. And when we get into life and relax and motivate ourselves through instinct and love, life is pleasant. You succeed with your goals, you achieve your desires, you find like-minded people to commune with. When you're in the river, as most people are, turned in the wrong direction, you're on a death march. And this is why we are enculturated, indoctrinated in Europe and here, that life is hard, it's a struggle, you're lucky if you make it, yeah, when you get old, you get sick. All of this nonsense they put into our heads. And so relax, people. But you got to let this one go to the wayside. I always consider the mind like the rudder on a boat. Now, the rudder on the boat's pretty important, but let me tell you, I could throw the rudder off the boat. As long as I have a sail in the boat, I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to throw the rudder out and swim with it. I'm going to die pretty quick.
And if the stream carries you, and that's the point, you know.
And this isn't new age nonsense I'm talking about, because I'm not much of a new age guy. This is down to earth, common sense shit that I've seen with the 285,000 people that I've worked with over the last 51 years. Who succeeds are people that let go. Who fails are people that get uptight, period.
End of story. Yeah. And realizing once you let go and you simply go with what you feel, I mean, it's literally like getting out of the matrix.
That's right.
Because, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
To put it that simple.
Exactly. You know, we have this web of intelligence. I call it the invisible library that's constantly there that we can access. And we keep thinking we're smarter than it. Even myself, I tell you these things, and sometimes I intervene with my own ignorance. Yeah.
It's a process, and at the end of the day, and that's why also we speak about high vibrations, because the idea really is to get as tuned in as we possibly can, and therefore we simply need to see, okay, what is actually pulling me away from that connection, right? Yeah. May it be food, may it be thoughts, may it be the environment, whatever it might be.
Well, you said it, it's the noise, and it's all of the above, you know, the noise, the gnawing stuff. When you don't trust yourself, you have to listen to others to get opinions. You don't need opinions when you have strength, and you have strength when you have yourself. Because you came here in all of the theologies and philosophies of the earth. I've read all of them. They pretty much tell you you're made in the image of the universe or God, that you are it. You're not separate from it. So if you just can really rely on that, believe me, you don't need to be listening to noise.
Yeah, beautifully said. It's all like I see it like it's all a beautiful orchestra of life, and you know, it's like a symphony. And the easiest way to actually see if something fits into that beautiful divine symphony is to see if it matches the tone, yet the frequency, right? So all that noise that is like off, right? That doesn't fit.
It's like the oboe player is drunk or something.
That's right. Yeah. So how about we get into some of those also off tones, because many people are still wondering, you know, with so much noise out there. I just want to clarify a few things. I love so much how you explain also the topic around when one consumes animal products, meats, and so forth, what kind of vibration that actually puts in our body and what that does with our subconscious. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Let's get really basic. And so possibly those listening can really internalize this. In human arrogance and biblical bullshit, we basically been told that animals are subservient to us. In all of my studies, and this isn't something I take lightly, I write books on these subjects, so I delve into 2-3 years of research in the latest science I can. Fish in schools are higher intelligence than us. They have personalities. Now that's a fish, no less a chicken, no less a turkey or a cow, a steer. And we disregard that, just like in war, the Americans during the Second World War called the Germans a bad name, or the Japanese a bad name. We had to dehumanize them. So we dehumanize animals. Now, with that said, take a breath. if I came after you with a knife, think about how you would feel. Do you think your adrenaline would be being pumped? Do you think your cortisol levels would go up? Do you think you'd probably almost have a heart attack by the fact you think you may die? This is what's happening in every little creature that we do this to. We create factory farms. These are entities, they're no longer life forms. And we literally have machines that cut their throats. And there is a wonderful film that will cure any of you that think meat eating is good, called Earthlings. But I'm a tough guy, and I cried. I had to shut that off 4 times and cried. And I'm not a sissy. And the reality is, it is absurd. How many of you know by law in Germany and France and the United States and Canada, that if you're caught filming in a factory farm, a slaughterhouse, you can go to jail 10 years?
Really?
Yes. That's a
Wow.
law that's on the books in every one of these developed countries. And people have been put in jail for it. Now, one of the best films I've seen that are a little less abrupt is they went into Australia, and somehow they got into the factory farms. He said, oh, that's Australia. Australia is the same as Europe and the United States. As a matter of fact, the world is the same because it's run by the same lunatics. You know, we have major multinational corporations that do the same thing in every country, crafts foods, general foods, you know, whatever it may be. And they're there. And so Dominion, this is a documentary I'd also like. So Earthlings is the first documentary. Dominion's the second. And it's beautifully done. It's well filmed. And they go into the factory farms and they show you. So now, we get to the third thought. My diet was almost exclusively animal-based foods. And when I was a young man, I was corrupted, as we all were corrupted, by the meat and dairy industry, who started the early part of the 20th century, before 1920, propagandizing and paying for education in school books. So as we sit here today and speak to you, that some of your education is being funded by the meat and dairy industry. Your governments, by the way, are supportive of the meat and dairy industry. And I was told by my teacher, now, other than my mother and father, the person I respected the most and spent 40 hours a week with was my teacher. And I'm looking up and my teacher says, you know, if you want to be a man, if you want to be a boy, if you want to have muscles, you better eat meat. Now, this is what I learned at 5 years old and 6 years old and 7 years. So of course, you're trying to find your sexuality when you're young, and they do the same to women. I'm just talking as a man, I can't speak as a woman, basically. So, you know, when I was a teenager, I went out of my way to eat bloody, large consumptions of animal-based foods. And I got sicker and sicker, but didn't know it because that was the norm. Women, they actually say you're going to get osteoporosis, your bones are going to break. They actually went as far as I remember in class saying, when you have babies, you can't feed your babies. Your babies will starve if you don't take milk from a cow. Now think about that. And so these poor little girls didn't know what having babies were at 10 years old. But the reality is, what they were doing is threatening their femininity. And so the ploy has been globally the same, to play and prey on your sexuality. And to basically say your womanhood and manhood is determined by you slaughtering, not you slaughtering, but slaughtered animals and the milk from their bosoms. Now, this is so absurd, but my mother told me this, and my grandmother told me this, and everyone I ever saw told me this, and my teacher told me this, and television told me this, and restaurants told me this. I didn't know anything else. And so it was so amazing. I've always been a flaming heterosexual. I just love women. That's it. And I'm blessed by God because I have a woman I'm so enamored to. My wife is like an angel from heaven. Yes, she's my girlfriend. She's my wife. She's a mother of my children. She's my co-worker. I'm blessed. So, but it doesn't mean I don't like women. I love women. And when I first chose to be a vegan in 1970, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is this going to change my sexuality? Now that's how ingrained it was in me. Think about that. Mm. No, never once in my life did I ever consider that, but I'm going to tell you, that's how ingrained it is. So no wonder a lot of you, and why men are so threatened by vegan diets. You know, women are a little bit more open than men about this, and it's because they are doubting their own sexuality, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. So ironically, when you consume meat, you become more feminine, because how they fatten the meat up is they inject female hormones into animals, and the milk has it in it and the eggs have it in it. So if you've ever noticed bodybuilders walk like this, now you know why. Now, another thought. When we all began this, you know, the word vegan came out of England somewhere in the middle of the 20th century when they wanted to be, they stopped using the word pure vegetarian. It used to be called pure vegetarian. They wanted to shorten it, so they call it vegan. Ah. We didn't have much research on it at that point, but now we have so much research, it's a joke to say we don't. I write books. I mean, I write academic books, not just for the lay public. I've written 30 books. I have a series, 3-volume academic series called Food is Medicine. And the fact of the matter is that we know that the countries that eat animal-based foods have more cancer, more heart attacks and strokes, more diabetes, more multiple sclerosis, more Parkinson's disease, more Alzheimer's disease, the list goes on. I mean, there's not one disease in the world that isn't amplified or created or invented by the fact that people are eating animal-based foods. Now, part of that, a B part of that thought, this institute has worked with the sickest people in the world and the smartest people in the world for the last 65 years. So only two kind of people come here. People that are afraid they're going to die, and people who are smart enough they don't want to be afraid they want to die.
That's it.
So we have movie stars that come here and superstar athletes that come here, the top
athletes, yeah.
Top athlete, the top. I mean, not the second one or the one that you see on television, all of it. Yeah. And in Hollywood, they train people on the Hippocrates diet to get buffed up bodies, to have the women and men to get muscles. They train them on this diet. And we have poor people that come here. It's not just an elitist place. And we have people from all over the world that come here, you know, and the sick ones have been failed by medicine. So we're not lucky like a doctor. When you're first sick, you come to us and say, oh, can you help us, Hippocrates? Usually they go through the monkey show in Germany or France or here or somewhere else. And now the doctor throws them out because everything they've done made them worse, usually. And they come here and I've seen thousands of them get well. Now, let me repeat the word. Thousands of them get well on a plant-based diet, an organic, raw, plant-based diet. Now, we have a clinical research. So reading all of the research is wonderful, but I can tell you firsthand, and I go toe-to-toe with any research doctor in the world, and I'll win the debate, that we have clinically watched people for 65 years heal catastrophic disease on a raw plant-based diet. And they're going to say, oh, well, there's not enough research. Well, read my books. There is enough research. You just choose not to read the research.
Yeah. They will always fight anyways, you know.
No matter what, you know, intellectuals are not smart. That's what I finally figured out. Intellectuals think they know everything, so they have no room to learn anything. And so when I go out to speak to them, I dumb things down and I'm very polite to them. But the reality is I'd rather go to a group of lorry drivers. They have more common sense.
And the thing is, you know, like they will always try to fight back because they are protecting the system. And at the end of the day, results count.
You're right, love. They don't even know they're protecting the system. I used to be naive enough to think the doctors were the bad guys, and you know they're not. They're just pawns in the system. They're high-paid pawns in the system. And I don't think these are evil people. I think that they're lost people. Now, another thought, we get onto the fifth thought here, is that not only have we clinically shown this for those years, not only is there plethoras of research that anyone that wants to read it can read. One of the things I do when I go out to dumb things down for the intellectuals and doctors is I have an inverted pyramid. So it's a pyramid upside down. And they don't ever know what it is. So I sit it there for about a minute up on the screen, and I say, what do you think this is? Oh, we don't know. It looks like you made a mistake. You put the pyramid in the wrong. I said, no. I said, the top are the countries that eat the most meat. This is the highest amount of cancer. And the one at the bottom, they don't eat any meat, and that's how much cancer there is. And they say, go on. And next to each of those lines that are an inverted pyramid, I have the name of the country. And of course, the countries you and I are from, the Western countries, have the highest amount in the world, because somehow along the way, the only idiots that ate animal foods hundreds of years ago were the aristocracy, the kings and queens and princesses. So as we had a merging money, not a lot of money, but people, a middle class came into place, we looked up the kings and queens and we wanted to do what they did. And we wanted to eat the sugar, and we wanted to eat the white flour, and we wanted to do, because that's what fancy people do. And the reality is, this is so clear to me. The appalling part is that anyone that would call himself a doctor or a biologist, a research scientist for heart disease or cancer or diabetes, who doesn't acknowledge this is a fraud. That's how evident it is at this point. They're absolute frauds. It's like environmentalists who don't talk about vegan diets. They're frauds. So we can no longer sit back like sissies and new age guru idiots and basically take this stuff anymore. This is absolutely criminal activity that's going on as we sit here and speak. When the evidence is clear, anyone that bothers to want to know, and if you're in the field, if your profession is disease and you don't acknowledge this, you are corrupt. If your profession is the environment and you don't acknowledge the impact that eating animals have on that one, you are a corrupt person. And other corruptions, you put people in jail. And these corrupt people are not only destroying the health of humanity and promoting the destruction of the health of humanity, they're destroying the very planet we're on. So just like we tell people who smoke cigarettes, you've got to go into a separate room. You can't smoke around me. Why the hell aren't we telling the people about the meat and animal consumption? Now, those people out there that don't want change, you're going to say, oh, Brian's extreme. You're extreme. The extremists have taken over. And the rational people are finally tired of you extremists. And that's all I can say to you.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing though is because it's such a cognitive dissonance, right? When one wakes up, and I'm sure there's now, well, many people who are here already, they are aware, but maybe not everybody. It's like I have many friends who started as a normal doctor, and they were like, actually, we don't get trained in nutrition. We have no idea. I have in my husband's family, we have doctors, they have no freaking clue. Like the conversations, it's like boom. And yet I know they mean it well. So now it's really time to wake up, and it can't be more obvious nowadays. What's going on the outside, everything is coming to the surface. And now I guess it's really the invitation to see like, okay, for which side, for what do I want to stand? For disease and make that bigger, or switch the side and make health bigger and really tune into what you are teaching. And there's so much information out there.
Well, it's even more abundant than what you're saying. Yes, it's not about disease and health. It's about survival and death. That's what we're talking. We're talking about truth and lies. That's what we're talking about. So these are the most fundamental, basic thoughts, that emotions that a human can possess. So death or life, truth or lies. That's where we are. And so they'd like to have industry are the people who are confusing the public now. Fake news. What the hell is fake news? There's truth and there's bullshit. So there's no fake news.
Yeah.
This is what's required for a human being to be healthy. And by the way, we're focusing today on the biological, food and exercise. But let me tell you, the psychology and affirmative thought is the number one overwhelming thing that governs all that we speak about. That's the wind in the sail of life. And if you don't have an affirmative, positive outlook, you know, in the way that you live life, all of this will go to the wayside.
Yeah.
You know, somebody came to me the other day and said, well, you know, Mary was a vegan for 30 years, and now she chose to eat free-range meat. Well, that's bullshit. There's no such thing as free-range grass-fed meat. You know, this is yuppie talk, as far as I'm concerned. And they said, what do you think about it? I said, poor Mary is lost. You know, that's all I can say. You know, Mary's out in the field eating animals rather than eating the nutrition the animal eats. I mean, you know, I don't know, and we don't have to condemn people. Just like I said to you, I don't think doctors are the bad guys. I don't think, you know, people are dumb. I think that we've been dumbed down, that we live in a subhuman existence. And if you just live in a human existence for one day, you'd say, whoa, that's a much nicer deal.
And that's where we want to get to. It's really like raising the vibe. And if you eat these kind of products from the industry and animal products and all these kind of things, you literally can't rise higher, because even it induces, right, just the feeling of guilt, because subconsciously we know what's happening to those animals, right?
Well, I'll give you a story, and this is not exactly animal. I was speaking at a medical conference a number of years ago, and who was coming off the stage was a guy I didn't have much love for. He was the former head of the Food and Drug Administration. And so these are, in my opinion, pretty evil people. And he came up to me and looked at me in the eye, and he said, I used to think guys like you were quack, but no more. So to be polite, you know, I said to him, what are you doing, Dr. Kessler, David Kessler? And he said, well, I'm studying childhood obesity. And what I learned was appalling. He said, I learned that every major international food company has chemists on their payroll that put synthetic opiates in the food to get us addicted to the product. Now, let me repeat what I've just said to the listeners out there. So what you're just saying is confirmed by the former head of the Food and Drug Administration, which is the most renowned organization on the planet Earth for overseeing drugs and food. So he says to me, there is not one major German, French, big company that you go to the grocery store that doesn't put synthetic opiates. So my immediate response was, isn't that illegal?
Synthetic what? Synthetic?
Synthetic opiates. Opiates are heroin. That's what it is. It's so addictive, it's a synthetic. So my response was, isn't that illegal? He said, no. These are not on the chart of illicit drugs. That these are synthetics that achieve the same dopamine effect in the brain, the addictive effect in the brain, without them being illicit drugs. I said, wow, that's amazing to me. I mean, I had a hard time, you know, nothing sort of stuns me. That stunned me. I had a hard time lecturing that day. He wrote a wonderful book, any of you that want to read more about that, called The End of Overeating, Dr. David Kessler, The End of Overeating. So, I mean, we're in a world of absurdity today. We're in a world where you are considered a number, you are considered a paycheck, you are considered an entity, not a life. And they have actually sat down and figured out when you're born, when you're going to die, how much you're going to afford to the economy, how much you're going to take from the economy. And that's the whole scoop at this point. And you say, well, my country is different. No, they have you believing, be patriotic, you know, your country is different. It is an international scheme. It's an international scheme. I don't care if you're French or German or Danish or Swedish or American, the same bums run the whole show.
Moving on, another great misconception, and I'd love you to speak a little bit about it, is the whole cooked food versus raw food.
But the one fact that nobody can squirm out of, I mean, the biggest intellects freak out when I make this. We share the planet Earth with 8 million species that we know of. Now there's maybe 20 more million species. They claim, the biologists today claim we're probably losing 12 species a day we've not even identified. So think about that. 100% of those species, 100%, of those species in nature eat 100% raw diet. The only species that choose to cook our food are humans. Now let's go back to the level of arrogance that we have. Somewhere along the way, anthropologists came up with a concept that when we cooked food, it made our brain grow. That is totally contrary to biology. If I cook a seed, it doesn't grow. How is my brain going to grow when I cook something? So just think about the premise that I've just given you. 100% of every other species eat raw diets. They claim that that's what segregate humans from other species and made us smart to eat cooked food. And this institute has put people on raw food for 60 years, hundreds of thousands of people, 65, and watched them come back. And look at, I'm 70 years old, going on 20 years old. Am I an enigma? Are all of those
You look
other
like 35.
I feel like I'm 20. I really
Yeah.
do. Today I was out with giant trees, planting 20 trees on this property at 8 o'clock this morning. That was fun for me. You know, and the reality is that's not the exception. You're the exception. The way we live is the exception. Now, grant you, I know many of you listening to us today are struggling just giving up animal-based food. So I'm not here to point my finger at you. Do you think I one day woke up and ate a raw diet? No way. I ate everything bad except meat and dairy at first. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, I have to eat healthy stuff too. And it was a slow progress. Yeah. Those of you that are listening that, by the way, are sick, you don't have time to mess around. You got to jump on this boat and take off at high speed. You got to embrace a living diet.
Book yourself either transformation program in Florida or when you do it in Europe. That's the
absolutely. You know, so we're now in the very early stages of seeing if we will at some point in the future have a facility in Europe. We will have a second facility in 2023 in Costa Rica. Yeah. That's already happening. So that's opening in 2023. And of course, here in Florida, people are usually here from all around the world. And so we invite you to come here. This is the mothership. This is where we have energy medicine departments that don't exist anywhere else in the world. And everyone has gifted psychotherapists they work with and hydrotherapy, and the list goes on. We have a room here I created that takes radiation out of the body. I mean, it just, you know, we're interested in doing the best we can with the technologies there are today. And, you know, a raw diet, by the way, brings you back to life. Now let's say some very practical things.
And living, raw living, I think we should make that point also. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're in the middle of winter in Europe, Northern Europe as an example, and you're buying vegetables that were picked 3 or 4 weeks earlier in Portugal or Africa, obviously it's not going to have much life force in it, not much nutrition. In either case, I always will say buy bioland, organic, ecological, you know, food, because you don't want pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, and eat them raw. But living food is different. Living food levels the playing field. So I can go to the richest people in the world and teach them how to grow gardens in their kitchen window in the middle of a snowstorm. And I can go to the poorest people in the world who can afford this, by the way, and show them how to grow a diet that has the highest protein, the highest vitamins, the highest mineral, the highest essential fat, and most important, hormones, oxygen, phytochemicals, and enzymes. I'll repeat it. This is what heals you. This is what keeps you young. Hormones, oxygen, phytochemicals, and enzymes. And by the way, if you cook the food, the proteins are disturbed, the vitamins are gone, the minerals are decreased, the essential fats become carcinogens, the hormones, oxygen, phytochemicals, and enzymes are kaput, and you have no medicine. Now, that's not an opinion. I'm talking about science at this point, people. Well, how come Dr. Smith, the vegan doctor, didn't talk about this? Because Dr. Smith is talking status quo vegan diets. I'm talking about the one that you should be eating, the one that every other creature on the planet eats, and by the way, the one that has reversed catastrophic disease for thousands of people.
Boom.
Boom. End of story.
Boom, end of story. Awesome. When we started speaking about that topic, is like, all right, we are the only species like cooking our food. Like, just look around, right? You didn't get into the details, because I think where people get caught up again is in that noise, like, oh, should you do this or that, da, 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 and it pulls you, and it's like a vortex. It's like, no, 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 stay centered, stay aware, like feel yourself, tune in, and just look. Like, humans are the only species cooking their food. Before we move on to the next topic, what would be one advice that you can also give people? Because I know myself, when I moved from, all right, I went the same process, right? Then you eat healthier and healthier, and then, all right, raw is the real deal, but you still might crave some cooked foods, especially in Europe, maybe when it's colder. What advice do you have for people like that?
Well, number one, if you're fighting a major disease, your aspiration should be to be 100% raw. A little cooked food, and I'll give you the numbers. The Institute was originally from Boston, and we were lucky there because we had a lot of doctors and researchers that volunteered to work with us, and they helped us do some research at that point. And we found out that when your immune system is strong, now what does that mean? You don't have cancer, you don't have HIV, you don't have chronic fatigue. You don't have, some catastrophic disease that you're on the way to death with. But it's strong, and it's been strong for a while. You can eat up to 20-25% of your diet by weight. So for every 4 kilos of food you eat, that may take 3 days, you could eat 1 kilo of cooked food, and your immune system stays stable. Now, if you have cancer, you can't do any of that, because you don't want any of your immune system cells to be fighting cooked food. And I'll explain this to you. You want it to be fighting the cancer or the virus or whatever it may be. Way back in 1933 in Paris, at the Pasteur Institute, they found out that there was a disorder where the body's immune system attacked cooked food called leukocytosis, white blood cell cytosis. Now, that's a done deal. The Swedes, back 38 years ago, discovered that high temperature cooked food, even if it's organic plant-based food, there's a second carcinogen called an acrylamide in it. And 69 years ago, they discovered that you heat any oil, it causes cancer and heart disease. So every food has oil in it. Remember, lettuce has oil in it. And so you don't want to do that. So, there's so much clarity on this. But I get it. I call it the mommy factor. My mother, who loved me, and I trusted, and I should have trusted her, basically said, eat this, it's good for you. So it's not only the substance addiction you have of the fats and the sugars and, the holiday food and this and that, and all of the romance we make around food, but it's also your mother.
It's your mother's fault.
Yeah, my mother told me that this is good food. So you're fighting all of this emotions inside of yourself. And ultimately, most people on the planet today eat food as a narcotic. They don't eat food as a substance or nutrition. I never heard the word nutrition in my house. I didn't know what nutrition was until I became a nutritional scientist. It's unbelievable. So you talk about, are you filled? Are you not filled? Does it taste good? What's the presentation? Does it look good? Does it look good? Does it feel good? Does it fill you up? Not, boy, it's really nutritious.
Lots of greens in there. Yeah, it's always sweet, salty, all these kind of things.
It's true, but so a little, this is no religion. This is a way of life that we want to make user friendly, and we're not out there to have you join a difficult process, but more so to create a life that's less difficult, that you simplify the way you eat. And once you have a life, and this, love, because I know I resonate with you. Once you have a life, food is not your life. It's ironic, I'm walking on a stage all over the world, and they say, one of the world's leading nutritional scientists. It's true. I don't even care about nutrition. This is just how I eat. It's how I eat. Now I have a life. So I go on and do the other things and live my passion, and I get fulfilled, and I contribute, and all of the things that turn me on. And remember, don't try to do things altruistically. If you just realize what turns you on what you're passionate about is what you're good at and what you should be doing, life becomes good. It's when you're confused, you think what turns you on is getting high or making love to somebody you don't love. That doesn't turn you on, that turns you off. But when you're lowly, anything that makes you a little happy temporarily, you think is good. You don't want to ever temporarily be happy. You want to be happy all of the time and totally avoid being unhappy ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why also I want to get into like the book you wrote, Emo Spirit. Before we do that, I still have a question. There's one thing that I absolutely wanted to speak with you about as well, since you are here, and that's one question about fermented foods. And we all know, right? I think it's so important because it's something that came up in my process where, often we hear like, oh, this is good, da da da. And then I am a type that then tends to exaggerate, and I was drinking so much kombucha ever since, right? And I was just like, it doesn't feel good to me anymore. And when we actually met in Florida, I already stopped kombucha, and I was like, and I remember I asked you like, is like all fermented food good? I don't believe so. And you told me like certain fermented foods are not specifically good for you, especially also long term. Can you speak a bit more about that? Because I think it's so important.
Yeah, what's amazing to me, if you look at the global cuisine, how people in Asia eat, the Germans eat, the Polish eat, pretty much every dietary culture had fermented food in it. So way back before the intellect was that important, when people all lived with their instinct, people wisely knew to ferment food. Now, there was partly a good reason for that. We weren't cooking and we wanted to store things. Remember this, we didn't have refrigeration. We didn't have any of that. And so people realized if I took a cabbage as an example and I fermented it, it would last me until the spring when I could get fresh cabbage again. But also they must have intuitively felt biologically been attracted to what it was doing. Now, fermented cabbage or kimchi, which is an Asian fermented cabbage, or a wide variety of other fermented foods, tempeh in Indonesia, where they realized soy is impossible to digest. 2,000 years ago, they started to ferment it. Really enhances the biology of the intestinal tract. Now, in plain English, you have a bioterrain there. That's where 70% of your immune system comes from. And by the way, you're your immune system. Everyone who's ever been sick has a weak immune system. Everyone who ever got well has a strong one. That's that. The other thing, which is more important than the immune system to people's mind, is 90% of the serotonin, happy juice, comes out of a healthy intestinal tract. So fermented food does it. Now, let me talk about some of the things that have unfortunately gotten off track. So somebody came up with an idea that if you take water and put white sugar in it or honey in it or something else, it creates a mushroom. No, it creates a fungi. It creates a mold, and it's still sugar. Then they went one step further and started to lie. And they said, when the mushroom happens, it eats the sugar. Well, no, the sugar doesn't evaporate and disappear. You still have sugar there. Glucose in the case of white sugar, could be fructose, it could be anything. And when you drink it, it's a fermented sugar, and all alcohol is a fermented sugar. Now remember that. How they make whiskey is they take grains and they pick sugars and it makes a whiskey. You get drunk with whiskey. And when they measure kombucha, it could be up to 6% alcohol.
Yeah, I got drunk from kombucha basically when I was it was too much.
And so isn't it nice for people who say, I don't drink alcohol, but I like kombucha because some quasi-authority who knows nothing about nothing makes up a story and says to you kombucha is good. It's not good. It's not a healthy food. Are there fermented foods that are good? Sure, the traditional fermented foods are great. Just try to avoid the salt. You can make, by the way, sauerkraut in 4 days. Take the same juicer that you juice greens with and wheatgrass with, and you grind up, homogenize the cabbage, chop up cabbage, put it in it, let it sit out, not in the refrigerator, but out, And within 4 days, it ferments. Put juniper berries in it. I love garlic in it, and whatever you like. That's healthy.
And you close it airtight or not?
No. You have to leave it open to the air. You put a cheesecloth on top of the screen or something so the bugs don't fly. Because bugs are smart. They'll eat healthy things too.
That is so true.
Yeah.
And how about kefir then as well? So maybe we speak about that as well. And
yeah, well I mean,
kefir,
you have this other group of people that are taking fats, coconut, and making kefir out of it. That's rancid oil. That's bad for you. That's not a healthy thing for you. Now, if you said to me, I picked a coconut from a tree and it was a little larger than normal and it fermented the coconut water I'm drinking, that's not a bad deal. That's perfectly fine. But when you take fats and grind it up and put it in there, ferment fat, that's not a healthy food for you. So there's a lot of these concepts that are out there. And again, I'm not going to condemn you. If you've been drinking kombucha versus Coca-Cola, congratulations. You know, these are all steps in the right direction. But, you know, kombucha is not the what you think it is. And no wonder it became so popular. I would see people staggering out of health stores with cases of this stuff. Their nose was red though.
And it's at the end of the day, you know, like it's a way of, I'm healthy. And then you still have that celebration or this or that. But at the end of the day, to me, it just felt like, I was like, no, it doesn't feel right.
It's quasi-health. And, you know, again, let's always make sure we don't beat people up. That all of these are progressions. They're all perfectly fine. It's not that you did the wrong thing. I did a lot of things along the way that I learned you could do better with. Yeah. Even the Institute learns more. Remember this. We used to give people massive amounts of fruit. And now we recognize in the legitimate scientific community that fruit feeds disease.
Yeah, that's the point. I mean, it's all a continuum and it depends on, you know, like you said before, if somebody is drinking whatever soft drink, then already kombucha will help to, you know, and then the next step, and that's how you go along. I
know. And then they do a big circle until you take whiskey again.
When you're mind over matter, I can take anything.
I think if I smelled whiskey, I'd probably die.
Yeah. Just tune into the frequency and you woo. No. See, another thing, because I read like a while ago, I was reading some lines by Hippocrates somewhere in an old script, and he, for example, used honey back then as well. What are your thoughts on that? And generally also people
use honey as a preservative. We go back to the lack of a refrigeration. So the honey, nothing can ferment, not ferment. Bacteria can't grow in honey. Isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. So they used it as a preservative. A lot of salt, for instance, they used to salt things to preserve it. So they would take vegetables, worse than that, meat, and hang it because they didn't have a refrigerator. So our taste for salt, our taste for sugar, it was a preservative. These are crystals. And so this is how we started with all of these things. So honey was used for that. It was pretty easy for them because in parts of the world, they didn't grow sugarcane. So they'd rob the poor bees. And now look what we're doing. We have hardly any bees left on the planet.
It's insane. It's insane. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the pesticides that Monsanto created and others that are doing that. So, you know, and Hippocrates, and interesting, I was a keynote speaker in Athens, Greece, about 5 years ago. And it was one of those times where they had, you know, I was supposed to be the big guy, Anna Marie and I, and they had other doctors there, MDs mostly. And one was a scholar on Hippocrates. And I didn't want him to stop speaking. I was learning. It was like everything he said, I was learning from him. And he said something interesting. He said, you know, how Hippocrates trained young doctors to practice is they would get into an open circular arena. So all of their arenas were circular because they realized it didn't limit your imagination at that point. And the Italians did that too in Rome. And they would put the person there. There'd be nobody there but the doctor and the woman or the man. And they would stand there until they could articulate who they were, why they were on the planet. Isn't this amazing? And so they said sometimes they wrote that the people would be there for several days. They'd go to bed, they'd get up the next day, they couldn't really express who they were, the doctor couldn't work with it.
Goosebumps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
isn't this amazing? And so once Hippocrates established that the person could identify who they were and their purpose to be on the planet, then he had the ability to help them. But if they didn't know who they were and they were confused, no matter what he did, he realized wouldn't work. And sadly, we don't have anything written by Hippocrates himself. Pythagoras wrote about Hippocrates long after his death. And the good news is, you say, well, it can't be at all correct. Well, it is, because the spoken language was the way that we entertained and indoctrinated ourselves in those days. So we would take from one generation to the next the stories, and it wasn't folklore where it was made up, but it was pretty much the way we guided ourselves, because nobody read, almost everyone was illiterate. And so we learned from each other. And the indoctrination of creating social norms came from that storytelling that was there. And so, I asked Ann Wigmore back in 1975 when I joined the team in Boston, why do you ever call this Institute Hippocrates? It's a cumbersome name. People have a hard time spelling it and writing it, etc. She said, because to honor him, that they've destroyed his name, that every year medical doctors basically take a Hippocrates oath.
Wow.
And I said, that was a powerful thing for her to say,
Wow.
And, she had healed herself after the top doctors in America, arguably some in the world, Harvard doctors at Harvard, basically said, you're going to die in 90 days. You're going to die in 90 days. And she healed herself. So she knew, not being a doctor, but she knew something's wrong with that picture. If I went to the best people in the United States and they told me I was going to die and I healed myself, something's wrong with that. That's why she was so clear she had to open the world's first health education center. She created the field of holistic healthcare, complementary healthcare. Before that, there were spas, where people would soak in water and different things, but there wasn't a place, nor is there a place equal to this. Now, where you come here, you educate, we literally, all the brainwashing you've done from the corrupt side, the dark side, we have to re-brainwash you to the good side, to the light.
It's an activation awakening center to the full potential.
That's what it is. I wish we could do shock therapy. It would go much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And the key is to remember who we are and why we are here for. That's so beautiful that Hippocrates did that already.
Wasn't it beautiful? I mean, I was so humbled by that whole experience. It changed the way I speak to people.
And I mean, if we know who we are, right? Like if we are a walnut tree or an olive tree or a broccoli seed, right? Then we'll know what we need. So then the cure is there.
That's right. If you can't identify who you are, you don't have a purpose. You don't have a purpose. You don't have a reason. You don't have a reason. You should leave. Let's be honest with you. It's tough to say that. When I'm with people who are sitting here who are close to death, which every day I am, by the way. Every day of my life, I'm with people who are close to death. And I always say, if you don't find your personal passion, you won't make it. They say, well, the food is going to do. No, the food is a tool. The movement and exercise, the therapy. We do the most advanced therapy, hyperbaric chambers, IVs, electromagnetic, cold laser, the most advanced in the world. We do. But if you don't have a personal passion, you won't prolong your life, but you're not going to recover. That's the key to the whole thing. That's key. You don't have to be sick, by the way. That's the key of why you're confused or not confused.
100%. That's a beautiful bridge. Also, I want to speak a little bit about emo spirit because I so resonated with it when you, I got it also when we met in Miami. I marked so many things and I was like, this is so along the essence of what it is all about. Would you like to speak a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, I was coming back from a 12-country tour of Europe, and I was high as a kite and exhausted too at the same point, because I was doing 3-4 interviews a day and doing 2 lectures sometimes, and in Paris one day, and Berlin the next day, and Stockholm the next day. As the plane landed here in Florida, and it bounced, I had this awakening. I don't know what happened, where I said, there's no difference between the spirit and the emotion. It just became vividly clear to me that we've segregated things. We've said, oh, this spiritual person and the emotion. It's all bullshit. That the emotions are your representative of spirituality or lack of. So you're actually articulating and expressing your depth of spiritual understanding. And let me demystify spirit. Spiritual isn't religious. It can be religious, but it doesn't have to be. Think of the derivative of the word spirit. When I think of spirit, I think spirited people, happy people, children running around, a horse that's just, a love to be alive. That's what spirit is. Yeah. And if we could align ourselves with that level of that extraordinary, endless amount of energy and enthusiasm, and then express it through our emotional being, you align life. And now you start to participate as a human being. When we are on our knees and asking God for health, rather than creating the reality of health, we're subservient. We're no longer spiritually awake. When we say prayers that we don't know what they mean, we're in the dark. We're not in the light at that point. If you think that you have to know certain words or do certain things to be awakened spiritually, you're off track. That you have to live a life of integrity. You have to be passionate about what you do. You have to love in every case, no matter how hard that is for you. And if you're doing that, you're living the laws of God, the laws of the universe. If you're not doing that, you're participating in a cult activity of some type. And most people are in cults. They're happy they're in cults, and they become experts in the cult. They talk about the cult, and they regurgitate the cult's thing. And God forbid you challenge the cult, because you're going to burn and go to hell. They're going to burn you at the stake because you disagree with their dogma. Yeah. And the fact is, there's no dogma in spirituality. There's only acceptance and love.
Yeah. Mic drop. Boom. Yeah.
Yeah.
The truth. So now I'm also thinking of the audience listening, and personally I had such a profound experience also when I filmed my film Lotus, because it was pure emotions, and that's where I made that connection also that you just mentioned. Yeah. And it's such a, how should I say, like, people float on the surface, and it's really about surrendering and like taking the leap and jumping into the cold water, right? And we also know that we have the seed, and the seed as such is in a dormant state. It stays like that forever. And once that seed immerses in the water, life starts to unfold, right?
It's like, let's talk about birth. When a male and a female are truly in love, that's what the manifestation is, another human being. Can you imagine that? That you literally, it's supposed to be that you love each other so much. You commit, you give 100% of yourself to somebody else. And the resulting effect, you have a healthy human being that comes out. This is the magic. I said, I do believe in some magic. These are the magical things. Yeah, things that you and I see every day, or take for granted. Just show you the magic of that book. So I finished the book. 2 hours later, right here at this desk, I get a call from a local college and said, we would like you to be the maitre d', the host for Mahatma Gandhi's grandchild. So I said, do you know this guy? And he said, no. He said, I've heard nice things about him. He does a nice lecture. I said, well, I'll make a deal with you. If he's riding on the coat tails of his grandfather and he doesn't have much to say, will you introduce him? Because I'm not going to get on the stage with a showboat. I just won't do that. I'm not interested in honoring somebody that doesn't deserve to be honored, that's living off his grandfather's thing. And I said, will he be there early? Yes. And I hardly get anywhere. I got there an hour early, and my wife and I fell in love with this guy. He's an incredibly conscious human being. And just in a matter of conversation, I just finished 5 days before that book. He said, why don't I do the foreword to that book? And, in that conversation, he said, you know, my grandfather spoke in a different language, and he wanted to articulate something, but he couldn't quite do it. So I had to translate from his language uh, the term, you have to be the change that you want. So it was this man that came up with that. Beautiful, beautiful thought. If you want change, you have to be the change. Don't say, oh, I'm waiting for somebody else to, waiting for the politicians. I'm waiting for, you know, God to intervene. I'm waiting for us to be able to go to Mars. All this is bullshit. You know, don't wait for anything. Make it happen. And if you don't make it happen, don't complain. Don't whine. And, you know, that's what I loved about this guy. And he's not a kid. He's probably 75, 80 years old at this point. And that's how the universe aligns sometimes. And I and you and everyone else, we don't really, we miss it most of the times. It just goes right by. Oh, what happened? I don't know. You were invited on the boat, but you didn't get on. You didn't get on the bus. And so I think life is so much more simple than we make it. And it's really not about what you learn. It's about who you are, what you do, your authenticity. You know, if you can't speak with clarity, and if you can't speak with honesty, this is going to confuse you and everyone else. If you don't love passionately, and I don't mean always romantic love, I'm talking about love. I happen to love you, by the way. I love your spirit. I love spending time with you. You know, and you find the joy in what we're doing. Why do anything that you don't find joy in? And recognize again all of the nonsensical religious bullshit that goes on out there, where they say you live for other people, you do for other. This is all crap. We don't have the ability to do anything first. It's not going to turn us on first. Let's get into that first. Okay. So why would you become a vegan? Because if you just let yourself have the license to do that, it's going to turn you on.
And a quick note, Brian, you mentioned that, well, meat eaters have a worse performance, sexually speaking. We should potentially mention also which great effect it has when we...
I mean, look at, you know, I love this film, The Game Changers.
Boom, yeah.
And the most poignant part of that film is when they took the three lovely young men in their early 20s, all super athletes in college. And they didn't even give them a healthy diet. They just gave them a sandwich with no meat and a sandwich with meat. And I watched the audience. I went to the theater. They had it in 1,000 theaters. And the men were stunned. They were stunned. And the women giggled. And so if you didn't see this film, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But all I can say is that the sexual performance of the young college athlete went up 500% by eating a shitty vegan diet.
Now imagine what grass juice can do.
Hey, Maron, let me tell you, I have no problem in that area.
Back to the magic, voila.
Voila, more.
Had to throw that in. Come on.
Sure, you're in France. If you don't throw that in, it would be almost a criminal act.
And I got a French vegan husband who drinks grass juice. Come on.
I'm telling you, that's the thing.
Speaking of,
because it's funny. When I lived in Switzerland, I knew a couple, and they were so funny. When they were 20 years old, they decided they wanted to be rich. This is a true story. And they said, there's two ways to get rich. Either we work, we go to university, we get our master's or a doctorate degree, we get out, we work hard until we're 45, 50, and we'll probably be rich. Or we can work for rich people who are never there. So that's what they chose. But they said to work for rich people that are never there in Switzerland, who had mansions and would come one week or 2 weeks a year, I have to learn all the languages. So they became highly sophisticated and proficient. So they were proficient in French, proficient in German, proficient in Italian. And what was so funny, I knew their emotional state, because whatever language would be fit to their emotions at that point, they would use. And they got romantic, it would always be French.
Ooh la la.
They were fighting, it was Italian. When they were emphatic, it was German.
Yeah, it's true. I do the same actually. It's because the
Is it?
word just fits it.
Yeah, you fit. That's nice to have that. You know, I'm one of these foolish Americans where I'm just learning English still.
Oh, come on. You are throwing so many words in always at your lectures, like your German ones, your French ones.
Yeah,
You're doing the
I know
same.
all the 10 words I rotate 10 times.
Awesome. Well, beautiful. Is there anything else you'd like to add to?
Yeah, well, let me just finish with this.
Yeah.
Uh, that the world is in a very interesting position at this point. That think of it as inside of a cave, it's pitch black. You can't see anything. If you not driving now, close your eyes. That's what it's like. It's just pitch black. And all we have to do to completely disrupt that darkness is light a candle. And it completely permeates, takes over the entire darkness. And so it doesn't require that half the population revolts lovingly. It requires a handful of us do. And we know the number is about 18%. The statisticians and mathematicians and biologists and sociologists tell us that we need 18% of the public to say no to insanity and yes to happiness, joy, love, and prosperity. And I think we're probably about 12.5 to 13% there. And events that have just happened recently on the planet, I think have backfired for the dark force, because a lot of people who were on the fence and sort of getting along and everything was okay and just don't bother me, I'll just watch football and drink beer, sort of it woke some of these people up. And they're starting to question the script, as I call it. You know, the script you get in school, the script you get in church, the script you get on television, the script you get from government. And that is a well-crafted script that has an intent. And that intent is to divide and conquer. And this is what they've done from the beginning of the human civilization. There's no such thing, but civilization. They talk about the conservatives and the progressives. They talk about the immigrants and the citizens. They talk about the women and the men. They talk about the blacks and they talk about the whites. They talked about the Jews and they talked about the Christians. They talk about the Muslims and they talk about the rest of us. And understand that this is the way they take you as clay and they mold your feelings. They mold your emotions with an intent to disrupt you. And disruption creates disorder, and disorder creates disease. And so the disease that's the worst disease, as I'll articulate the second time now, is not a biological disease, it's a psychological disease. And the disease of hatred is the worst disease in the world. And you don't hate others until you hate yourself, until you question yourself, until you loathe yourself, until you doubt yourself. I have no room to hate other people, but I did at one point, because I would much rather blame you for my problem than to take responsibility. I would much rather say, everything's okay, somebody else will handle it, than do the work that's required to take charge. I understand this, people. I just hope you understand it. And I'm not here to basically say to you that it's all easy to say no to what's going on at this point, but it's the right thing to do. It's a filling thing to do. It's the human thing to do.
Yes.
So thank you so much for the time we spent together.
Thank you so much for all you are, for all you do. Also for everybody watching, I'm going to post everything underneath. As soon as you can, hop on over and get your butt into the Hippocrates Health Institute, either in Florida, either in Europe, in Costa Rica. I'm going to update everything all the time. I'm so grateful we get to have this conversation and connect, and it's simply so amazing what you do. And yeah, thank you for everything.
Be well. It's a lot of fun. Remember that.
Yes.